Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we are here at Competence Analytics with Nick and Pat. We're going to dive into the importance of testing products, what their testing program is all about, how they do it, the ins and outs, and then we'll get a tour after that. Let's get right into it.
I'm Nick Mosely. I'm the CEO and founder of Competence Analytics.
And I am Pat Reynolds. I am the Operations Director at Competence Analytics.
And I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge, and we were talking about cannabis testing. This is a testing facility, one of the best in the state, and talking about some recent recalls. Uncle Ike's Pot Shop started a program called the OK Verified program. We've had about 7 recalls. We'll go over those in a minute, but probably one of the only self-initiated programs. And so we'll kind of talk about the divergence in this state. Hopefully we'll get to that. But just kind of jumping right into it, there has been sweeping legalization that brings cannabis out of the shadows and is shining a spotlight on the cannabis category in ways that have never been seen before. And this is especially true in Washington's market, where not all products are required to pass testing for pesticides and heavy metals before reaching store shelves, even though the state has set thresholds for pesticide and heavy metals. So what happened? We used to have testing, and now there's not.
Well, we still have testing. Testing hasn't gone away. In Washington State was the first state to have testing requirements in place and robustly described. And they have the testing requirements in Washington have evolved slightly over the last 5 years, and we still have testing requirements. What has happened is other states have come online and have had more rigorous testing requirements than Washington. Washington has kind of fallen behind in that regard. So as you mentioned, pesticides, heavy metals, these are tests that are required in most states that have legalized since Washington, and Washington has not caught up.
Now, that said, pesticides and heavy metals are required for DOH certification here in Washington State, which is
medical endorsement.
Medical endorsement, separate to what the LCB kind of licenses and endorses, but that has been available for quite a while.
How substantial is the medical market in Washington? What market share does it hold?
I don't know. The figure I've heard is about 2%.
Wow.
Yeah.
So specifically with Competence Analytics, how have the changing Washington regulations impacted your testing workflow?
Well, we were, I believe, the second lab in the state to achieve pesticide certification. So to have the accreditation from the state to do pesticide testing on cannabis. We do that voluntarily. We're not required to have that certification. Our customers are not required to purchase that test from us. But pesticide testing, we're talking trace level residues in cannabis flower and concentrates, is very challenging work. And it has caused our lab to really advance in its technical capabilities over the last 3 years since we started pesticide testing in 2016.
Yeah, I would second that. It's been, as a non-chemist, kind of somebody who came in, learned how to work in the lab and work my way up through the organization, just seeing the way that the lab has developed and the skill sets that we have acquired over the years, which have been driven by the demands of the quality of testing that we've put on ourselves, that we've decided to do. It's just been going from strength to strength. So really the impact on our workflows, if you want to sum it up, has been very positive and has made us actually better as a lab and better scientists.
Have there been some unexpected challenges that you face in the cannabis testing space?
Yes, I think just sort of broadly speaking, I think everybody, when they first think about pesticide testing in cannabis, what they think about are plants and farmers and chemical abuse by unscrupulous cannabis farmers. And while that is a reality in some cases, I think the majority of cannabis farmers are not intentionally contaminating their plants with pesticides. I think that when you really dig into the issue of pesticides in cannabis, what you find is that it's a very complex scenario that involves incidental exposure from drift from other farms, accidental exposure, either because the pesticide applicator is unaware of the ingredients that they're applying, or even in many documented cases, the pesticide applicator is applying something that has unlisted pesticides on its label. And then even beyond that, how the pesticide gets onto the plant in the first place, it may not be an unscrupulous act, it may be an accident. But even moving past that, there are complex manufacturing processes that take place after the plants are harvested. And these manufacturing processes can concentrate the pesticides, they can cross-contaminate the pesticides from one batch to another. And oftentimes the products are trading hands multiple times throughout the manufacturing process. And all of this leads to a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity about how the pesticides end up in the final product. For example, a vaporizer cartridge. A lot of process went into that. And when there's pesticides there, it's hard to know why. And I will represent that the cartridges tend to have the biggest problem when it comes to pesticide exposure, not the flower, not the cannabis flower.
I guess I'm going to ask you to infer something. You can decline if you'd like, but I'm wondering if that's the mold to gold scenario. We've kind of seen some billboards where there's businesses that are willing to buy at a very cheap rate moldy flower for production in oil and joints. I know there's been a couple of tests where some 5 infused joints and 5 non-infused joints all came back as moldy. So with cartridges specifically, is that herbicide and pesticides because you can't really see that product, that derivative?
Yeah, so this is like I am having to speculate here, right? So this is a bit of armchair speculation with the caveat that, my lab, we're testing products that are submitted to us by brands and manufacturers, and we don't often have great visibility into all of the intricacies of the processes that created these products. But I will speculate broadly that I think the reason why cartridges tend to be more contaminated than flower is because cartridges are often made with a starting material that is trim, not flower. And we know that trim tends to have a higher pesticide burden than flower because the trim is the leaves existing on the exterior portions of the flower, so it's more externally exposed.
Larger surface area.
Larger surface area. These leaves are more exposed. They exist on the plant for a longer period of time. So trim tends to be more contaminated than flower, and trim is the starting material for most extractions. Also, most extractions are happening, many times, extraction is taking place at a facility that does not grow. So it's trim coming from other farms, multiple farms often. Trim is being purchased and brought to an extraction facility. So the person who's doing the entity that is doing the extraction may not themselves have great visibility into the source of their material. And then there's blending that happens. There's contracted outsourced work in the manufacturing process. There's blending that takes place. All this happens before the cartridge finally gets filled.
The banking industry has a KYC requirement, know your customer, and since I think 2001, it's know your customer's customer. So I would imagine that if we're going to have an SRO like the banking system, a self-regulatory organization, essentially a regulatory buffer between the business and government, creating the laws, giving it to the government to sign, they're going to probably implement something similar to that KYC program. To normalize what you mentioned, when I cook, I use salt very lightly on spinach and leafy greens, but if I'm using Brussels sprouts, like a big chunky flour, I can use more. Is that a really dumbed down version of pesticide use, more surface area that can hold more contaminants with trim versus a dense flour?
Yeah, I think,
So
generally,
that's reasonable.
it comes down to just basic geometry.
And then what about with natural? Because some of it can be nefarious. The cartridges you mentioned were found with Eagle 20. That's an herbicide. When heated up, turns into a carcinogen. Obviously not good. That could be nefarious. It could be just a lack of education. But what about more of a natural situation where we're coming across or coming with fire season again? And so a couple years ago in Oregon, we saw that the mold spores naturally occurring blew into and through the filter systems in Portland and Oregon, eastern Oregon, and almost, I don't want to say almost, but there was a lot of failure rates with mold. How does that affect testing and branding and sales?
Well, I mean, cannabis is an agricultural commodity at its root, and so it is subject to environmental and seasonal effects, which may include, a fire season and a bloom of fungus that can lead to excessive mold spores on the plants. So, and I think that will obviously be borne out in testing, where mold testing is a requirement, like Oregon.
Is it currently not?
It is not required in Washington State. Mold testing is not.
And that could be an issue. There's, I think, at least one known case, if not two, people who have died as a result of smoking moldy cannabis in California. A gal died who had stage 4 cancer, I believe.
Was that mold, or was it specifically aspergillus? Because if it's specifically aspergillus, and that's mycotoxins, right?
Yeah, but they are made from mold.
Right.
That's way over my head. That's
so
really specific.
There are certain mold species that make toxins. Most notably, certain penicillium strains and aspergillus strains make toxins. And so in Washington State, and I know in a few other states, rather than screening for yeast and mold broadly, we're specifically screening for toxins that certain mold species produce, such as aflatoxins and ochratoxin. So that may be what happened in this case. Aflatoxin, ochratoxin, they are carcinogens. They're liver toxins, especially a chronic exposure can be harmful.
Without an autoimmune system, yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some current bottlenecks you're finding most often or most difficult?
We have redundancy in our instrumentation here, and we have scalability with our staff. So I think, we handle bottlenecks pretty adeptly. I don't think
we've built ourselves to scale. That's kind of one of our operating principles, is that we try not to do everything as a one-off. If we're going to develop and implement a new procedure or a new method, we want to do that in as standardized a manner as possible, and keep it as familiar as possible to the analysts back in the lab, so that it's not a massive learning curve every time. I mean, really, kind of when we come across bottlenecks, kind of one bottleneck that we have right now is on our intake stations back in the lab. So where they actually receive the samples when they come in the morning, they take the photographs and they weigh the samples. We've got 2 of those back there right now, but the kind of volume that we're seeing is telling us that we need to put a 3rd station like that in the lab, so that our intake process doesn't become a bottleneck and hold the lab up.
Yeah, I think generally, we do keep track of where our bottlenecks are. We know the throughput of our instruments, and we try to be sure that we're scaling ahead of meeting a bottleneck situation. Yeah. The samples have to be taken after the product is finished, and then the product can't be sold until the test results are obtained. And so as a result, there's extreme pressure on the cannabis testing laboratories to have a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we focus really hard on.
So testing is required, and yet we're seeing with the OK Verified program that some of these products are coming back with mold or herbicides or something that's going to require them to be pulled off the shelf. So to recap, the OK Verified cannabis testing program, they take product that's considered to have failed. It shows pesticides or heavy metals above the state's action levels. The program holds the products tested under the OK Cannabis to the same standards as Washington that are listed under pesticides, heavy metals, and microbial. I feel it's my personal opinion that Washington State has let down not only medical but consumers in general by not testing more thoroughly. And so I'm wondering if collaborating with the OK program in a sense has effectively shown how needed testing requirements are.
Yeah, I think most importantly what the OK Cannabis program has done is it has created awareness among the cannabis community about this problem. it has highlighted deficiencies in the state's quality assurance mandates, and it broadly has created a consumer and bud tender awareness about the issue and the need for a correction. So yes, I think that as much as Washington State has fallen behind, this lab has tried really hard to keep up with the regulations in other states, knowing that eventually there is going to be more standardization between states. And the OK program is, I think, an interesting opportunity for self-regulation to keep Washington cannabis to keep up with cannabis productions in other states.
Yeah, it's interesting bringing up that self-regulation again. That the SRO, I think, is going to be the way that cannabis has to move with banking and regulation in general. So to recap some of the fails in November 2018, I think there was a flower, a cartridge, and then I'm not sure what this, I'm guessing this other one is a flower as well. And then in February 2019, there was a pre-roll. Those were the infused and non-infused pre-rolls. April of 2019 had flower concentrate and RSO concentrate and another, looked like it's a distillate concentrate. Can you speculate or infer what some of these companies have learned from this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So our lab first became involved with the OK Cannabis program in April. So it's really those last three fails that we were directly involved in. And what I can tell you is that it was seen as a moment of reckoning for the businesses that experience fails. I don't think it's crossing any lines to even drop the names of Skagit Organics and Smoky Point Productions. Both were shocked at the results, and once they got over their initial reaction, they kind of came to terms and realized that it's what they experienced through the OK program was not due to a direct fault of their own, but it's a true problem. It's a real product liability that they're holding on to, and they're not alone in holding that product liability. And they both stepped up, and at least so far have publicly exclaimed that they want to do it right and that they're committed to a robust quality assurance program internally, even if it's not required by the state. And so, yeah, I think it was seen as an opportunity for reckoning by those two, and as an opportunity to show that they're ready to respond to a moment of crisis, and use it as an opportunity to improve their practices and hopefully regain trust.
Yeah, I noticed there was a couple of companies that pass the blame, being kind of a middleman or processor. It wasn't their product, and that result didn't go very well. Social media kind of had some backlash on those companies, and so we've seen that if they are accountable, regardless if it's their fault or not, it's their brand. So taking accountability, I think, is really going to help recover from any bad publicity. I kind of want to touch on a previous answer that you had about the standardization across the states. You were just in California, and that's fifth largest GDP in the world behind the United States. And so maybe they'll lead the charge. Where are you kind of seeing as labs become multi-state operators? Where is the cohesion, or where's that balance at for interstate testing? Is there going to be a norm?
I hope so. I think most of us want to see standardization in the testing results. I think that right now California is the leader in terms of the thoughtfulness of their regulations. I think they've got some problems in implementation, but I think every state has experienced that. And as you mentioned, they're the fifth or the sixth largest economy in the world, and they often have the strictest regulations for consumer safety. And that's true for cannabis, it's true for automobiles, it's true for a lot of manufactured products. And so I think we're quickly going to find ourselves in a position where, when interstate or international commerce is opened up, the feeling is going to be, if you meet California's quality assurance standards, then you meet quality assurance standards anywhere. The same thing can be said about automobile manufacturing, right? If it meets California's emission standards, then it meets standards pretty much anywhere.
So the state's regulatory landscape remains fairly dynamic. However, if this industry hopes to meet high-quality global standards, it must be a premier analytical testing methods to put into place and do it quickly. Looking ahead, what future challenges do you anticipate in the testing space?
Method standardization is going to be a really challenging topic. Right now, there aren't sufficiently described standardized methods for doing a lot of the tests that the labs are required, and it honestly it's going to take years to develop those standardized methods. So in the meantime, each lab has to develop their own methods. They have to validate internally. They can try to cross-validate with each other. But until there are internationally recognized standards for the labs to work on, that's going to continue to be an area of complaints. Again, I think it just takes time. Another thing that I would say, this goes back to your previous question. As much as I think California leads right now, in terms of their testing requirements, I think that programs like OK offer an opportunity for the community of cannabis businesses, the people who are actually boots on the ground, to start showing more appropriate and even stronger methods for quality assurance. So what the OK program is doing is they're taking products off the shelf. So this is almost like a secret shopper mechanism. Now, secret shopper testing is an expensive mechanism for testing, but it's also a very powerful mechanism for keeping everyone honest. And so, in my personal opinion, the strongest regulatory mechanism for quality assurance involves a combination between batch level testing done by the manufacturer as well as random sampling at the retail level. That's something that no state requires, but it's something that voluntary programs like OK Cannabis, like our own Tested with Confidence program, married together, this is businesses voluntarily acting in a way that I think beats any regulatory requirement.
Do you see Washington being the leader as all of these states kind of come online and try to standardize? And what's the biggest challenge to develop these standards to meet future regulations?
I do think that Washington has fallen behind some of the new states that have come on.
Yeah.
However, I think we still have a chance. Washington has a strong chance to come back to the leadership position. And be more influential in the way other states come online with their regulations. So for example, in this last legislative session, there was a bill passed through the House. It was House Bill 2052, which creates a cannabis science task force and allocates funding, about $1.5 million, for the Department of Ecology to begin looking seriously at cannabis science standardization generally. And that may be an avenue through which Washington State can regain its leadership position in the quality assurance of cannabis.
Yeah, quality assurance is I think, that's where everybody needs to start looking in terms of cannabis production. And quality assurance and quality management, I think, are going to be the two biggest kind of hurdles that people have to jump over in terms of, once FDA regulation comes in, once we start doing this at a national level, all the practices that we're going to have to operate to are going to have to be good management practices, good laboratory practices, good agricultural and collection practices, all of those like EU and Canadian standards, yeah. And Nick is absolutely right. That is going to be the forefront of cannabis production is maintaining the quality. That's what everybody out there is trying to do right now. They're all trying to grow the same plant over and over again so that they can have repeatable numbers, repeatable mechanisms, repeatable procedures. So people that are focusing on that are going to do well in the future. But yeah, I think Washington has an opportunity to kind of seize the moment there when it comes to being a leader in letting people have the best quality management systems available.
Any last words?
I want to come back just a little bit to the Tested with Confidence program, just because I honestly, and I don't want to, I never wanted to set up Tested with Confidence as a competitor to the OK program. They are separate and distinct, yet they are complementary. Yeah, the OK program is bin level testing pulled off the shelf. Tested with Confidence is a quality assurance program that manufacturers, producer processors can sign up to with confidence analytics to put that commitment out there to their customers that they're doing what the OK program needs. They're going above and beyond what the state requires, and they're doing that now because they recognize the value and they recognize the importance of their consumers now, and they're not going to wait until the state mandates it. Yeah, and you know, kind of people like that are the sort of customers that we want to work with. And I think they're people like that. People who sign up for the Tested with Confidence program, I think, are going to be the leaders in the cannabis field, certainly in Washington, and potentially far beyond that as well. So,
you're not going to see 1,400 cannabis farmers. You don't see 1,400 tomato farmers, and so peace of mind is what's going to help those brands circumnavigate the M&As, the consolidation, the capitulation. And for me, it's ever since these testing results have come out last November, I've really not bought anything from the store. I have a friend who does medical. I know that he's not using pesticides, and so that's my trusted person that I go to. And so if there is a program like OK, and I don't have to spend the outrageous amounts for an organic natural product that's maybe $60 a gram, and I'm used to spending maybe $20 for a distillate or oil. These programs are peace of mind to sell more.
Go on conflabs.com/tested-with-confidence lists all of the brands that are participating in the Tested with Confidence program.
Google search Tested with Confidence.
Or just Google search Tested with Confidence will get you
there.
But
I think you get right to the core of it there. It's about trust.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there is one of the major drivers for legalization. And you can come up with a lot. There are a lot of arguments for why cannabis should be legalized. There are social justice arguments. There are job creation arguments. There are environmental protection arguments. But usually when you ask someone why they support legalization of cannabis, because it's tested is in the top three.
Yeah.
Because people want that trust. And when you're purchasing cannabis from an illegal source or from an unregulated source, sometimes you have trust because you know the person. That was something that you just mentioned, right? So if you know the person and you trust them, then you can have the trust. But a lot of times when you purchase from those illegal or unregulated sources, there isn't a lot of trust, and there probably shouldn't be. And I think that what the cannabis industry is experiencing along the lines of trust is something that a lot of other industries have also experienced. And it goes back decades to consumerization as that was first unfolding in the United States. People used to buy their shoes from cobblers, and there would be two cobblers in town, and everybody knows the good cobbler and the not so good cobbler. But then as consumerization unfolded, people started getting their shoes from big box stores, and suddenly the manufacturer is unknown, and people start losing trust in the quality of those products. And that's when quality assurance and third-party verification programs began to open up. Like the Good Housekeeping seal is a great example of that. One of the first examples of trying to regain consumer trust through a third-party independent review of the manufacturers. So it's not unique to cannabis, and in fact, it's happening right now as well in the nutraceutical world.
Yes.
Right. So the nutraceutical world, like much of the cannabis world, is under-regulated. And it's starting to come to light that a lot of the nutraceutical products that you can purchase at a big box store, they are mislabeled, they are contaminated, And you see third-party verification programs starting up, like USP Verified, which does something very similar to what Tested with Confidence and OK program does, right? It's routine batch-level testing orchestrated by the manufacturer with a third-party tester, along with retail-level secret shopper to keep everybody honest.
Yep. CVS just published on their website the details of their program. I can't remember exactly the tagline. It was very similar to Tested with Confidence.
It's called Tested to be Trusted.
Tested to be Trusted, yeah. And it was basically saying, look, hey, we realize that all of these nutraceuticals and dietary supplements are completely unregulated because everybody's talking about it. So we've taken it upon ourselves to test these products for heavy metals and other contaminants, kind of things. So you're seeing the, like Nick was saying, the big box stores starting to step up and do that on top of the batch level testing. I also picked up an article this morning from my friend Alfredo over at Marijuana Business Daily. NGOs in Europe, non-government organizations, are starting to test. In Europe, I think they're still categorized as novel food items, so that's all that you can add CBD to over there and sell it. And they've been doing a lot, like just going out buying stuff off the shelf, analyzing it to see does it match the label claims. And about a third of what they're seeing, and there was like I think 3 different studies published from 3 different nations in Europe, all around the same time, and they all kind of came to the same conclusion. About a third of what's labeled is good. Yeah, it is what it says. About a third has something in it, but it's nowhere near what the label says. And then there's another third that's got absolutely no cannabinoids in it whatsoever. Yeah, and that's global. That's a global market right now, and it is literally the Wild West. So people are screaming for trust marks, trust programs. They just need a way to be able to look at a product and say, okay, I know these guys have done it right. So that's what we're all working towards. But it's becoming very, very visible.
Yeah, there's a lot of snake oil, so there's a reason that you have quality assurance and company or groups like the OK program, Confidence Analytics. So where can they find you? ConfidenceAnalytics.com. You guys on social media?
Yeah, we're on social media. Yeah, Tested with Confidence.
Just search for Tested with Confidence. Search for it on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. And you can also pop along to our website. Like I said, the Tested with Confidence landing page lists all the brands that are participating in the program. So go check it out and get yourself some quality Washington product.
All right, let's get that tour.
Cool. Ooh. Come on through. Thank you much. All right, so this is kind of the main lab floor, but before we talk about what's out here, let's walk into the main prep lab for a minute. So once we receive all the samples up front, they are brought back here for intake, sorted into bins. We have photo stations with scales over here, so everything is photographed and weighed when it comes in. We have our laboratory management system that tracks all of the samples. We've got our dashboard on the wall here, helping the lab analysts track what's going on. We're kind of in intake mode at the moment. We're prepping samples, laying them out. What you're looking at there is some tubes for sub-samples to go into. These are our muffin trays. That's how we organize everything into 4x6 arrays. And that's what everything travels through our system in. So stuff comes in here, it'll get sub-sampled, put into other tubes. One of the most interesting things that we do when it comes to sample preparation is the preparation of the flower samples. So what we used to find was we used to hand grind the flowers, and we were finding that there was, when different analysts would scoop on the same sample, there would be a huge difference between the results that they would produce on those samples. And what was happening was that because the flour was dry, the trichomes were sifting to the bottom of the grind, So that was impacting the potency. So if you didn't scoop it right, you weren't going to get the same answer, yeah? So what we decided to do was to approach it completely differently. So follow me this way. So instead of hand grinding the flour, what we now do is we put it in one of these tubes. This is a rather dirty tube. We would never put flour into this. This is just kind of sitting out here. But we'll put the flour into this tube along with a couple of metal ball bearings, and then stick this tube in a blast freezer for about 10 minutes, chill it down to -40, and then we'll clamp that tube in a block onto this boy over here. This is the Geno grinder. This platform here goes up and down at a rate of 1500 RPM. So when you've got 2 ball bearings going through frozen flour at 1500 RPM, that powderizes what's in that container, yeah? And then when that gives us a very homogeneous mix, and that then allows our analysts to scoop from the same sample and get a much reduced difference between the scoops. So it helps us keep our results a lot more consistent. So that's kind of one of the cool things we do with flour. Once everything gets subsampled in the back there, it'll be brought out to have solvents added so that the cannabinoids can get extracted from the plant material. We'll then further process them, filter them in, this is our main prep hood. We'll filter them into auto sampler vials. And once they're in the auto sampler vials, these are the auto sampler vials here, we'll put them onto one of our HPLC machines, high pressure liquid chromatography. We've got 2 machines here that have about 100,000 samples, cannabis samples under their belt between them. Probably the most experienced cannabis analytics machines in the world. The one that you were just focused in on there is our UHPLC, so just a more pumped up version of those.
What do these do?
So these machines will do our cannabinoid analysis, so they will tell us the breakdown of the various cannabinoids that are in the material. So this right here is our triple quad LCMS. This is what we do our pesticide and mycotoxin analysis on. This is $250,000 worth of equipment. Similar to what the cannabinoid analysis instruments do, but it uses a different detection method. It uses mass spectrometry as opposed to UV detection. So that's,
are there benefits to using both or either?
They're just separate techniques. You know what I mean? This allows us to look at this lets us do part per million analysis. Yeah, this lets us do percentage by dry weight. Yeah, gotcha. 2 really different measurements. Yeah. So yeah, pesticide and mycotoxin analysis here. We've got a terpene analysis machine right here. This is a gas chromatograph. This one was commissioned not long after myself and is still going strong. Then we have one terpene machine right here, but hopefully pretty soon we're going to move our terpene analysis over to these gas chromatographs. So these are gas chromatographs that do mass spectrometry rather than flame ionization detection. Right now we're using these guys to do residual solvent analysis, so making sure that the solvents get purged from the concentrate production process. But we'll also be adding terpene analysis to that method as well, so we'll be able to do 2 in one shot, similar to how we do with the pesticide and mycotoxin analysis right now. And that's pretty much it when it comes to the lab space. What's in your cannabis? And with that, we're going to roll this up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Or don't. And I'm out. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Nicely done.
Cool. That was a good finish.
Yeah, it turns out we do have